They say Denali is the most beautiful park in Alaska, but beauty doesn't keep you alive out here. We have rules, old ones, passed down by rangers who didn't make it back. And if you ever find yourself deep in this wilderness, you better remember every single one. The sun wasn't even up when I pulled into the station that morning. My breath hung in the air like smoke. I didn't know it yet. But today was the day I'd learn why those rules exist. The first thing they tell you about Alaska is that it changes you. The second thing they never say out loud, because saying it makes it real, is that sometimes the wilderness notices you back. I didn't believe that when I arrived at Denali. I'd spent a decade fighting wildfires in California and thought I understood danger, heat, exhaustion, dehydration, the physics of chaos. But fire behaves with reason. It eats, it spreads, it dies. The wilderness here doesn't follow rules. It makes them. The morning I began my first solo patrol, the sun still hid behind the peaks, painting the sky in bruised violet. My truck engine ticked in the freezing silence outside the ranger station. Breath fogged the windshield like thin smoke. For a long moment I just sat there, listening to the distant echo of something. Wind, or maybe a scream carried from the mountains. Mark Alvarez's truck was already in its spot, frost glazing the hood. Of course it was. Mark had been a ranger here longer than I'd been alive, and rumors said he slept more in the station than at home. I grabbed my pack, the canvas stiff with cold, and pushed through the heavy wooden door. Inside, the place smelled of old coffee, paper, and pine cleaner. Mark sat at his desk under the single fluorescent light, writing something on a yellow legal pad. When he looked up, the years showed in his eyes, gray, steady, and tired. "You're early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." "Good," he muttered, folding the paper in half with surgical precision. "Means you're paying attention." He slid the paper toward me. Across the top, in his small, neat handwriting, were the words "Unwritten Survival Rules." I smirked. Some kind of initiation. "Something like that," he said. "They're not in the manual, but they'll keep you alive out there." I skimmed the list. The rules read like campfire nonsense. 1. If you see red hanging in the trees, walk the other way. 2. Don't answer when the forest calls your name. 3. Keep music handy. It keeps the silence honest. 4. Never stare into mirrors after dark. 5. If you meet yourself, run. I laughed before I could stop myself. "You're serious?" Mark didn't laugh back. "Everyone thinks I'm joking once." There was a stillness then, thick enough to hear the hum of the light overhead. Outside, the wind scraped across the siding. He finally stood, grabbed his thermos, and said, "You'll understand soon enough. Head north along the Talkeetna Ridge. Radio check every 4 hours. And Ethan..." He waited until I met his eyes. "Remember, rules exist because somebody broke them first." That line lodged somewhere deep. By the time I loaded the ATV, daylight was still thin as smoke. I strapped my pack, checked my satellite phone, and started down the access road. The engine growled against the hush of the morning. Miles of untouched forest unfolded ahead. Endless, beautiful, indifferent. For the first hour, everything felt ordinary. The radio crackled with check-ins from other patrols, the sky brightened, and my breath thawed in the air. The ground glittered with frost. Spruce needles whispered under the tires. Then the silence shifted. It wasn't louder or quieter. It just felt different, like the air itself had drawn a breath and was holding it. Birds stopped calling. The hum of the engine sounded too sharp, like a foreign object in the landscape. At mile 7, I cut the engine and listened. Nothing. No wind, no dripping meltwater. just that heavy, waiting quiet. I told myself I was being jumpy. First solo patrol nerves. Still, I felt watched, not by something with eyes, but by the land itself. When I reached the base of the ridge, I parked the ATV and started the hike on foot. My boots crunched through snow-dusted gravel. Every sound felt magnified, the scrape of my zipper, the slow inhale of breath through the scarf. Halfway up, I stopped to take a photo of the sunrise spilling between the peaks. That's when I noticed it, a strip of red hanging from a birch branch about 30 feet ahead. It fluttered once, then went still, a scarf. Bright crimson, too clean, too new against the gray bark. I thought of Mark's first rule: if you see red hanging in the trees, walk the other way. My rational brain said it was litter, maybe a lost hiker's gear. The other part of me, the part that had heard the seriousness in Mark's voice, hesitated. I stepped closer anyway. The snow beneath the branch was undisturbed, no footprints leading in or out. The fabric swayed gently, even though the air was perfectly still. I reached for it, intending to take it down. Then, faintly, a whisper, my name, not shouted, not spoken, whispered from behind me. "Ethan!" I turned fast. No one, just endless trees climbing toward the ridge. The radio at my shoulder hissed with static. "Ethan!" This time the voice came through the radio. My own voice. I froze. The device hung from my vest. Green light blinking. I hadn't keyed the mic. "Ethan!" It repeated, softer, almost pleading. I snatched the radio off my vest and flicked the switch off. The forest went dead silent again. My pulse thundered so hard it felt like noise. When I looked back, the red scarf was gone. Only the branch remained, bare and gently swaying, as if whatever had hung there had slipped away just before I turned. I backed up slowly, my boots crunching on frost until I could no longer see the branch. Then I turned and walked. No, jogged, back toward the ATV, telling myself over and over that it was nothing, a trick of wind and static, maybe a glitch in the frequency, but I didn't turn the radio back on for the rest of the day. By the time I reached the next marker, the sky had cleared to a hard blue and my hands had stopped shaking. Denali's peaks looked magnificent, calm, eternal. How could something so beautiful feel predatory? That night, camped by a frozen stream, I couldn't shake the memory, the whisper, my own voice echoing from the radio, the missing scarf. Maybe Mark's rules were just folklore, old ranger superstitions to keep newbies alert, but folklore usually starts with something real. I wrote the 5 rules into my field notebook anyway, right beneath my wildlife notes. And for the first time since joining the Park Service, I set my phone beside my sleeping bag with music queued up, just in case. Before I fell asleep, I caught myself whispering the first line under my breath. "If you see red hanging in the trees, walk the other way." And the wind answered, faint, almost human, like it agreed. I woke before dawn, disoriented by the sound of something brushing against the outside of my tent. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The nylon walls trembled softly as if fingers dragged across the fabric. Then it stopped. Just wind. Or at least, that's what I told myself. When I crawled outside, the world had turned to silver. Frost glittered on the pines, and the faint light of morning stretched across the ridge. No prints around my tent, no movement in the trees. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me like static. The first thing I did was switch on my radio again. Static hissed, but no voices. I cleared my throat. "Station 3 to Denali Base, radio check." After a long pause, Mark's voice came through rough with sleep. "Copy 3, you all right out there?" Yeah, I said, forcing calm, just making sure the signal's good. Stay on schedule, he replied, and Ethan, don't ignore the rules. His tone left no room for sarcasm, then the line went dead. By 8 o'clock, I was back on the trail heading toward Takitna Ridge Lookout. The terrain steepened, snow crunching beneath my boots. At a rest stop overlooking a valley, I spotted movement near the tree line below. Someone hiking without gear, a slim figure in a dark parka. I lifted my binoculars. Female. Auburn hair glinting in the light. She was kneeling beside a cluster of rocks, taking samples. That had to be Tessa Morgan, the park's wildlife biologist. I'd met her only once during training. Bright eyes, quick laugh, the kind of person who believed science could explain everything. I keyed the radio again. Station 3 to Morgan. You out near the South Valley? Her reply came after a crackle. Cole? That you? Yeah, I'm collecting lichen samples. Didn't think anyone else was crazy enough to hike this early. Guess that makes two of us. We agreed to meet at the Ridge checkpoint before noon. I felt oddly relieved. Company meant normalcy, conversation, proof that I hadn't hallucinated the events of last night. By the time I reached the checkpoint, Tessa was already there, crouched over her notebook, measuring something on the snow. Morning, rookie, she said without looking up. You look like you saw a ghost. Something like that. I hesitated, then told her about the red scarf and the radio incident. I expected her to laugh, but she didn't. She closed her notebook slowly. I've heard stories like that, she said. Local rangers talk about strange interference in the North Valley. Voices on open channels, echoes that sound human. You believe that? I believe in phenomena we don't understand yet, she said. That's different from superstition. We checked the weather station together, routine work that felt grounding. The metal tower groaned in the wind, sensors ticking. Tessa scribbled readings, muttering numbers to herself. Then her expression changed. Hey, she said softly, pointing to the snow a few yards away. Boot prints, not ours, larger, deeper, leading from the trees toward the ridge edge, then vanishing abruptly as if the person had walked straight off the cliff. No drag marks? I murmured. She shook her head. No, just stops. A thin gust blew snow into the prints, erasing them. The air suddenly felt colder. I bent down, brushing at one of the prints with my glove. The edges were sharp, fresh, less than an hour old. I followed the line back toward the forest. A fragment of red cloth lay caught in a shrub. Tessa frowned. That's not yours, right? I didn't answer. We searched the perimeter but found nothing else. The radio crackled again. Mark's voice, faint this time. Cole, check in. Do you copy? I pressed transmit. Copy, Mark. We're at the ridge checkpoint. Found some odd footprints. Don't follow them, he said sharply. Static swallowed the rest. Tessa raised an eyebrow. He always that dramatic? Not usually. The sky darkened around noon, clouds rolling in from the west. We decided to head back before the snow hit. I walked ahead, scanning the path. Halfway down, I stopped dead. Someone had placed a small object in the middle of the trail, a folded piece of paper weighed down by a stone. Tessa picked it up carefully, gloved fingers shaking off snow. On the paper, written in tidy block letters, were 3 words. You broke one. She looked at me, eyes wide. Ethan, is this your idea of a joke? No. My voice came out hoarse. We searched the area again. No tracks except our own. The message felt like an accusation whispered by the forest itself. That night we camped together at a lower elevation. The storm hit hard after sunset. snow whipping sideways, rattling the tent fabric. We set the lantern between us and tried to laugh it off. "You know," she said, "there's a psychological condition called pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist. Maybe the red scarf, the prints, even that note, it's all coincidence and your mind connects the dots." "Maybe," I said, "but whose mind wrote that message?" She didn't answer. The wind did instead, moaning through the pines like something alive. Around midnight, I woke to faint music, an old country song, muffled, coming from somewhere outside. I thought Tessa had left her phone playing, but her sleeping bag was zipped, her breathing steady. The music drifted closer, then stopped right outside the tent. I reached for the flashlight, heart hammering. The beam hit the nylon wall, throwing shadows of branches, and one silhouette that wasn't a branch. It looked like a person standing still just beyond the canvas. I leaned toward Tessa, whispering her name. Her eyes snapped open instantly. "You hear that?" I breathed. She nodded, her hand already gripping her radio. She thumbed the mic. "Base, this is Morgan. We've got movement outside our camp." The reply came fast but faint, almost metallic. "Morgan, this is..." "Morgan, stay inside." We stared at each other. That was her own voice. She killed the radio. The silhouette outside tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Then, without sound, it turned and vanished into the storm. Neither of us slept again. At first light, we packed up and started back toward the station. The forest seemed normal again. Birds calling, snow melting from branches, but everything felt thinner, like the world had lost some invisible layer of safety overnight. By late morning, we reached a fork in the trail. One path led toward base, the other deeper into the North Valley. There, hanging from a tree limb at the intersection, was another strip of red fabric fluttering lazily. Tessa stared. That wasn't here yesterday. I thought of Mark's rule and the note. You broke one. "We're leaving," I said. We didn't speak again until the station came into view hours later. Mark was waiting by the ATV shed, arms crossed, snow still crusting his beard. He didn't ask questions, just looked at me and said quietly, "Now you understand why we have the rules." Behind him, nailed to the wall, was a small wooden sign I hadn't noticed before. Burned into it were the same 5 sentences from his list, and someone, recently, had added a 6th in smaller letters beneath. "If you think it's over, it's already started." That evening I sat in the ranger station with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Outside, snow drifted past the windows in slow, heavy flakes. The whole world seemed wrapped in silence again. Tessa sat across from me, her cheeks still pink from the cold, flipping through one of the station's old incident logs. Mark had gone into his office, leaving us alone with the faint hum of the space heater and the creak of wood contracting in the cold. "Mark's not telling us everything," she said finally. I looked up from my untouched drink. "You think he planted that note? The one that said, 'You broke one'?" She shook her head. "No. That kind of handwriting, you saw it. It was printed. Careful, almost military. Whoever wrote it meant it to be read." I didn't want to admit how much that unsettled me. Instead, I asked, "What are you looking for?" "Old search and rescue files," she said. "When I was going through the wildlife archives last month, I saw a case from 2012. 2 rangers missing near this sector. No official explanation. I thought maybe it was just an accident, but..." She trailed off. "But now I'm not sure." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were weather-stained reports, faded photographs, coordinates scribbled in pencil. The case name read, Operation Ridgepoint Recovery. I skimmed the first page. Ranger Timothy Brooks, last contact 2240, August 3rd, 2012. Last known location, Talkeetna Ridge. Search initiated August 4th, terminated August 11th. No recovery. Another ranger had disappeared the same night. His partner, no bodies, no gear recovered. Only one item was ever found, a single red climbing rope tied to a tree near their last radio ping. My throat felt tight. So that's where the red hanging in the trees thing came from. Tessa nodded. Probably, but who turned it into a rule? Before I could answer, Mark emerged from his office. He'd changed into a clean uniform, but his eyes looked older somehow. You two should get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we'll sweep the North Valley. Stay close to the ridgelines. Tessa hesitated. Mark, what happened in 2012? He paused at the doorway, jaw tightening. You already know the answer, he said. Then he was gone, boots thudding down the hall. When the sound of his footsteps faded, Tessa exhaled sharply. He's hiding something. Or protecting us, I said quietly. That night I lay awake in the dormitory bunk, staring at the ceiling. Every time the wind groaned through the eaves, I thought of that voice on the radio, my voice, and the way the red scarf had vanished. I thought of the message in the snow. You broke one. Sometime after midnight, I drifted into a half-sleep and dreamed of the forest. Endless trees moving like waves, whispering words I couldn't understand. When I woke, the clock read 3:17. The room was dark except for the faint light of the moon through the window. Then I saw it. Something standing outside, near the tree line. A silhouette. Motionless, watching the station. I pushed myself upright, heart pounding. The figure was tall, dressed like a ranger, hat, jacket, boots. For a second I thought it was Mark, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it wasn't him. It was me, my shape, my uniform, my stance. I blinked hard. The figure turned slowly and disappeared into the trees. I didn't go back to sleep. At sunrise, I told Mark and Tessa what I'd seen. Mark didn't seem surprised. Rule 5, he said quietly. If you meet yourself, run. Tessa frowned. That's not funny. Wasn't meant to be. He turned and went to prep the snowmobiles, leaving us in the awkward stillness of his words. The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. We loaded supplies, checked our comms, and started toward the North Valley. The engines roared to life, breaking the stillness of the landscape. For a while, the ride was normal. Sunlight glinting off frozen branches, the white expanse of snow stretching for miles. But as we climbed higher, the wind died, and static filled the radios again. Then a voice crackled through my headset. Mark, this is Cole. You there? It was me, my voice, clear and calm. I slammed my gloved hand against the headset. Mark, that's not me. He killed his mic without replying. I saw his shoulders stiffen. A minute later, the same voice repeated, Mark, I found it, the body. The words cut off in a burst of static. Mark slowed his snowmobile to a stop. The three of us sat in silence, engines idling. Tessa looked from me to him, her breath misting in the cold air. Tell me you heard that, she said. Mark nodded. Keep your music ready. We pushed on another half-mile before stopping near the frozen riverbed. Something dark jutted from the snow, a half-buried ranger pack. The tag on the strap read T. Brooks. I knelt beside it, brushing off snow. Inside were standard supplies, flashlight, maps, a soaked field notebook. The pages had fused together with ice. But one entry was still legible. August 3rd, heard it again. Thought it was my voice this time. Mark says, keep music on. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's the silence that calls. I looked up at Mark. You were out here with them. He didn't answer. Tessa opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, the radio crackled again, louder now. Ethan, the voice said, calm, steady, identical to mine. You shouldn't have come back. My blood ran cold. The frequency wasn't even open. My hand hovered over the power switch. Then the voice whispered again, closer this time, like it was behind me instead of inside the radio. Rule 1, it said. You broke one. The forest around us seemed to inhale. The air went still. Not a single sound, not even wind. Music, Mark hissed. Now. We all fumbled for our phones, thumbs shaking. My playlist started mid-song, something familiar and human, and the silence broke like a glass shattering. Wind roared back through the trees, snow tumbled from branches, and the static vanished. When it was over, Mark finally spoke, voice rough. Whatever's out here uses silence, don't give it that. I stared at the forest, my reflection trembling in the mirrored ice of the river. For a heartbeat, I saw two of me. One crouched on the bank, one standing farther down, facing away. Then the second shape blurred and dissolved. That's when I realized something I hadn't noticed before. My reflection wasn't moving in sync. For a long time, none of us moved. The wind screamed across the ridge, snow spiraling in tight circles around our boots. My reflection in the ice shivered, lagging behind like a faulty signal. Then, without warning, the surface cracked. A thin line of black water split through the frozen sheet and swallowed the image whole. Mark yanked me backward by the collar. "Don't look at it," he barked. "What the hell was that?" I shouted, breath steaming. "Something you don't want to understand," he said. Tessa stared at him, eyes wide. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" He didn't deny it. "We've had sightings here for years. Reflections that move on their own. Voices that repeat what you say. That's why the rules exist. They're warnings. Tested the hard way." "The hard way?" I demanded. Mark looked past me at the river, his jaw clenched. Ranger Brooks thought the voice calling his name was one of us. He followed it into the forest. They found his tracks walking in circles for a mile before they just stopped. I felt the cold seep through my gloves. "And the other ranger?" "He saw himself," Mark said quietly. "That's all we know." We left the site without another word. The ride back was a blur of snow and silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something unseen moved through the trees beside us, matching our pace. Once, when I glanced to the left, I thought I saw my own figure again, running parallel just beyond the tree line. When the station finally appeared through the haze, I'd never been so relieved to see a roof in my life. We parked the snowmobiles, killed the engines, and trudged inside. The heat hit me like a wave. I peeled off my gloves, fingers numb and pale. Mark locked the door behind us and went straight to his office. Tessa and I sat by the old wood stove, thawing in silence. The only sound was the crackle of burning pine. After a while, she said, "You think it's all real?" I stared into the fire. "I don't know, but I know what I heard, and I saw something that looked like me, standing where I should have been." She hugged her knees, her voice small. "Maybe we shouldn't be out here." The lights flickered, just once, but enough to send a ripple of unease through the room. The fire popped, scattering embers onto the hearth. I stood. Power lines, probably, but the generator was diesel and it never faltered. From the hallway came a faint thud, then another. Tessa looked up. "Mark?" she called. No answer. I grabbed the flashlight from the wall and stepped into the hall. The beam cut through the dimness, catching dust in the air. The sound came again, 3 slow knocks, rhythmic, deliberate. They were coming from the storage room at the far end. "Mark?" I tried again. "You in there?" Nothing. I reached the door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. I gripped the handle and eased it open. The smell hit first, cold air and something metallic like wet rust. My light swept across shelves of old equipment, ropes, snowshoes, lanterns. In the middle of the floor lay a single object, a folded piece of paper weighed down by a small stone. I crouched, heart pounding, and lifted it. The handwriting was the same tidy block letters as before. Rule 6. Never open the door when it knocks. Behind me, something exhaled. The light shook in my hand as I turned. The doorway was empty, but the corridor beyond had darkened, shadows stretching longer than they should. From somewhere deeper in the building came another sound, soft and dragging, like fabric brushing wood. I backed away, clutching the paper. "Tessa!" She appeared at the end of the hall, flashlight trembling. "What is it?" "Someone's inside," I said. "Lock the office door." We hurried back to the main room. Mark wasn't there. His radio sat on the desk, its green light blinking. The microphone was off the hook. I picked it up. "Mark, do you copy?" Static. Then his voice, calm, too calm. "Don't look behind you." Tessa's breath caught. "Ethan." I turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was Mark, or something wearing his shape. The same uniform, the same lined face, but his eyes were wrong. Flat, reflective, like frozen water. He smiled, lips thin and pale. "You shouldn't have opened it." I raised the flashlight, but the beam passed through him like fog. For a heartbeat, he shimmered, his body breaking into fragments of shadow. Then he was gone. The generator sputtered and died, plunging the station into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, thumb hitting play on instinct. Music burst from the tiny speaker, soft acoustic chords echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. The air seemed to shift, the walls groaning like something under pressure. Tessa gripped my arm. "It's working," she whispered. The shadows retreated, slithering back toward the hall. Somewhere behind them, something hissed, furious, almost human. Then the front door banged once, twice, and went still. We stood frozen for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the phone speaker and the distant wail of wind. When Mark finally walked back into the room 10 minutes later, covered in snow, his real face pale and shaken, none of us spoke. He took one look at us at the dead generator, at the open radio, and said quietly, "You let it in." He crossed to the wall and tore down the wooden sign with the carved rules. Splinters flew. Then he grabbed a marker and wrote across the bare wood in thick black strokes. "Rule 7. If you hear knocking, you're already too late." The fire had gone out completely. The room smelled faintly of cold metal and smoke. Later that night, after Tessa fell asleep on the couch, I sat alone at the table staring at the folded paper in front of me. Rule 6, Rule 7. The list kept growing like the forest itself was writing its own commandments. Outside, snow drifted against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, something knocked once, slow and patient. I didn't move. Instead, I turned up the music until the sound was gone. And that's when I realized what scared me most. It wasn't what I'd seen out there. It was the knowledge that Mark's rules weren't superstition anymore. They were documentation. They were survival. And maybe, just maybe, I'd already broken too many of them. If you want to hear what happened next, what the forest showed me when the rules stopped working, make sure to subscribe, because the next part of this story is where the real nightmare began. They say Alaska has two kinds of silence, the kind that gives you peace and the kind that listens back. After what happened in the station that night, I'd stopped pretending I knew which one surrounded us anymore. Mark barely spoke for 2 days. He kept to his office, sorting files, rewriting the rules on a new piece of wood like the old one never existed. Tessa and I stayed busy repairing the generator and checking the perimeter sensors. Work kept us sane. Work was normal. But normal didn't last long in Denali. It started with the wind. On the morning of the third day, the temperature had risen above freezing, and the valley was buried under a low mist that rolled like ocean surf. From the tower window, it looked alive, breathing in slow waves, swallowing the trees, then exhaling them again. Tessa joined me, mug in hand. "Does fog usually move like that?" she asked. "Not unless it's carrying a storm." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the valley. "I keep hearing something in it, like voices underwater." I didn't answer. She wasn't imagining it. I'd heard them too. By afternoon, the fog had climbed the slope and reached the station. Visibility dropped to 20 feet. The sound of the world changed, muffled, underwater, as if we were sealed inside something. Mark emerged from his office finally, wearing his heavy parka and that same grim look I'd seen before the first patrol. "We're going down into the valley," he said. "Now." Tessa frowned. "In this fog? We'll get lost." "That's why we stay close and follow the markers," he said. "Sensors picked up movement down there this morning. Could be wildlife. Could be something else." He didn't need to explain further. We loaded the ATVs and descended through the curtain of fog. Within minutes, the station disappeared behind us. The trail wound down through dense spruce forest. The fog thickened until even our headlights were swallowed whole. Every sound bounced back at us strangely, like echoes without a source. At the base of the ridge, we stopped near the river crossing. The mist swirled around us, glowing faintly in the dim light. The air was so still that when I exhaled, the sound of my own breath felt too loud. Tessa checked the GPS. "We're right above the North Valley sensor." Mark crouched, brushing frost off the small transmitter box. Something triggered it around dawn. He stood suddenly, looking toward the tree line. There. Through the fog, I saw a shape, small, unmoving, hanging. We approached slowly. My chest tightened as the shape came into focus. It was a red scarf, the same shade as before, bright, almost luminous against the gray world. It hung from a low branch, completely still, even as fog drifted past. "Rule 1, I whispered. Mark didn't move closer. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Rule 1. Tessa stared at it. "You think it's the same one you saw before?" "I don't know. Maybe." "Then how the hell did it get here?" Nobody answered. The scarf stirred once, almost like it had taken a breath. Tessa reached for her camera. Mark stopped her with a sharp, "Don't." She froze. "You think it's dangerous?" "I think," he said, eyes still fixed on it. "We don't know what it is, and that's reason enough." The air around us felt heavier, like pressure before a storm. My ears popped slightly, and I realized how quiet it had become. No birds, no wind. Even the river behind us had gone silent, its current frozen mid-motion. Then, faintly, like a memory whispered through static, someone called my name. "Ethan!" It came from inside the fog. I spun, scanning the trees. "Who's there?" No reply. Then again closer. "Ethan, help me!" It was my father's voice. For a second, everything inside me froze. My father had been dead for 8 years. Tessa touched my arm. "Ethan, what is it?" I couldn't speak. The voice came again, softer now, pleading. "Please, it's cold." I stepped forward before I realized it. Mark grabbed me. "Don't listen," he said, his voice low but urgent. "That's how it starts." The fog thickened between the trees, and through it I saw a faint silhouette, a man standing in the haze, hand outstretched. "Ethan!" I tore my arm free and shouted, "Who are you?" The shape didn't move, didn't breathe, but the fog around it shifted, swirling faster like the air itself was trying to form words. Tessa's voice broke through the static in my head. "Ethan, look!" She was pointing back toward the scarf. It was gone. The branch hung empty, still swaying slightly, and then from somewhere deep in the fog came the sound of music, soft, melancholy, like an old vinyl record playing underwater. Mark swore under his breath and pulled a small speaker from his pack. He thumbed it on, blasting static-filled country music into the stillness. Instantly the air changed. The fog rippled like a curtain struck by wind. The silhouette dissolved, the voice cut off mid-word, and the normal sound of the river returned in a rush. Tessa and I stood shaking. Mark turned down the speaker, breathing hard. "That," he said finally, "is why we keep the music rule." We stayed another hour, collecting data from the sensor, but none of us spoke again. When we finally started back toward the station, the fog began to rise, slowly retreating toward the valley floor as if something had simply lost interest in us. By the time we reached the ridge, sunlight burned through the clouds. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like being watched by something invisible and patient. That night, as I sat writing my report, I found something new in my notebook. A piece of red thread pressed between the pages, coarse, rough, and damp, as if it had just come from the fog, and written in small, neat letters beneath it. "You heard it this time. Morning came like it always does in Alaska, slow, gray, and indifferent." I hadn't slept much. The red thread from my notebook felt heavier than paper should allow, like it carried weight beyond its fibers. Tessa met me in the mess hall, already in uniform, hair tied back beneath her beanie. She pushed a cup of coffee toward me and said, "I think I found something." Her laptop was open, screen flickering with topographic maps of Denali. She zoomed in on the region below the ridge. "There's a glacial sinkhole system here. Locals call it the Whispering Valley. It's full of fissures and air pockets. When the wind passes through, it can sound like voices." "Natural explanation," I said, trying to sound convinced. "Maybe," she replied, "but no one's mapped it completely. The last geological survey was 25 years ago. The same year those rangers went missing." She turned the screen toward me. "Look at these coordinates, the scarf we found. Same latitude." Mark entered just then, holding a thermos and looking as if he hadn't slept either. "You two planning another joyride?" Tessa straightened. "We want to investigate the valley acoustics. If the sounds are natural, we can put this to rest." Mark's jaw tightened. "And if they're not?" She hesitated. "Then we'll at least know what we're dealing with." He set down the thermos. "Fine, but we follow the rules. All of them, I mean it." We left within the hour. The fog had lifted, revealing a sky so blue it looked false. Sunlight glittered on the snow-crusted trees, deceptive in its warmth. We followed an old service trail down to the valley mouth, carrying rope, mapping gear, and enough emergency rations for 2 days. By noon, we reached the lip of the sinkhole basin. The terrain dipped sharply into a labyrinth of ridges and hollows. each one echoing with the faint rush of wind. It sounded almost like whispering, hundreds of overlapping voices too soft to separate into words. Tessa set up her recorder, her face a mixture of wonder and unease. "It's beautiful," she said. "Beautiful things kill you here," Mark muttered. We descended into the basin single file, crampons biting into the ice. The deeper we went, the stranger the sound became. No longer mere wind, but something textured, layered. Some voices seemed to call names, others to hum fragments of melody. Halfway down, my radio crackled. "Cole?" The voice was faint but clear. "You're off course." It was Mark's voice, except Mark was right behind me. He stopped, brow furrowed. "You hear that?" "Yeah," I said. He swore softly and tapped his headset. "Turn it off, both of you." We killed the radios. The whispers grew louder in their absence, as if noticing the new silence. When we reached the bottom, the air was warmer, almost humid. Steam rose from fissures in the ice, curling like breath. The walls around us gleamed with veins of blue crystal. Tessa crouched near a vent, holding out her hand. "Feel that? Warm air. Must be geothermal." Mark scanned the shadows. "Whatever it is, keep your distance." I wandered a few paces away, drawn by a faint sound, a woman's voice singing somewhere beyond the ice. The tune was old, familiar. "Shenandoah." My mother used to sing that song. I froze. The melody wove through the cavern, echoing in impossible patterns. "Ethan," Tessa called. "You okay?" Before I could answer, a gust of wind surged through the valley, carrying a dozen overlapping whispers. My flashlight flickered. For an instant the walls reflected not my face, but hundreds of faint outlines, like figures trapped in the ice. Then it was gone. Mark's hand gripped my shoulder. "We're leaving, now." "But we just got here," Tessa protested. He pointed to the recorder on the ground. Its digital timer spun backward. Tessa stared at it. "That's not possible." Mark's voice was steel. "Pack it. Whatever's down here, it bends more than sound." We climbed in silence. Each step upward felt heavier, the air thick with static. Near the top, Tessa slipped on a patch of ice. I caught her arm, but something in the shadows below caught her attention, a flash of red against the white. "The scarf," she whispered. It lay on a rock directly beneath us, coiled like a living thing. The end fluttered once, though there was no wind. Mark didn't look down. "Keep moving." We reached the ridge, breathless, the valley yawning behind us like an open mouth. I turned once, and the scarf was gone again. Back at the station, the mood shifted from tension to exhaustion. Tessa downloaded the recorder's data while I wrote up the day's report. Around 8 p.m., she burst into the mess hall, laptop in hand. "You need to hear this," she said. She hit play. At first, it was just wind, the whoosh and hiss of air through rock. Then, buried underneath, came a voice. Mine. "Mark, this is Cole. You're off course." The same phrase we'd heard earlier, recorded long before it happened. Tessa's hands shook. "It's like the valley plays time backward." Mark leaned against the counter. Silent. I replayed the clip, listening for something else. In the background, almost hidden, was another sound. Faint knocking, rhythmic, steady, not an echo, a heartbeat. I looked at Mark. "What's the next rule we haven't heard yet?" He met my eyes. "The one I never wrote down." "And that is?" He hesitated, voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't stay after the valley calls your name twice." The radio, silent for hours, crackled to life. "Ethan!" Tessa gasped. Then again, louder this time. "Ethan!" Twice? The station's lights flickered, and outside, the wind started to sing. When the radio spoke my name the second time, it didn't sound like a voice traveling through static anymore. It sounded like someone whispering right behind my ear. Tessa flinched. "It can't know your name." Mark snapped the power switch off and threw the radio onto the table. "It knows all our names," he said. "That's what the valley does. It learns you." The wind outside rose to a howl that made the windows rattle. I crossed the room and looked out through the frosted glass. The fog had returned, coiling up the ridge in pale ribbons. Something moved within it, shapes too tall to be human, drifting slowly against the current of the wind. Tessa's laptop pinged. She looked down, frowning. "The recorder's still running," she said. "It shouldn't be. I shut it off hours ago." The screen showed the live waveform of a new recording. At first, it was only the wind. Then came a faint melody, soft humming, the same tune my mother used to sing. "Shenandoah," I murmured. Mark grabbed his coat. "Pack the gear. We're locking down the station." He went to the supply closet and pulled out a heavy steel bar meant for blizzards, sliding it across the main door. "No one goes outside until morning," he said. Tessa's voice shook. "Mark, if the valley's affecting our equipment, maybe it's electromagnetic interference. Maybe it's not supernatural at all." Mark looked at her with the weariness of someone who had already lost that argument many times. "Whatever you call it doesn't matter. The rules keep us breathing." The lights flickered again. Then the generator sputtered and died. The sudden silence was total, thick enough to hear our own heartbeats. I switched on my phone's flashlight. The beam trembled slightly in my hand. "I'll check the generator," I said. Mark blocked me with one arm. "You open that door, it opens back." I almost laughed. "It's a machine, not a monster," but his eyes stopped me. I buried 2 rangers who thought the same thing. Tessa rubbed her temples. "We can't just sit here. We wait till sunrise," he said. "Always sunrise." The next hour passed in half light. The temperature inside the station dropped fast. We wrapped ourselves in blankets and listened to the wind clawing at the walls. Once or twice I thought I heard footsteps pacing the porch. At 11:47 p.m., the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate strikes on the front door. Tessa looked at me. "Rule 6, she whispered. "Never open when it knocks." The knocking came again, harder this time. Then a pause. Then a single lonely tap against the window pane. Mark stood motionless. "It's trying to find a way in." The third knock wasn't at the door or the window. It came from the ceiling directly above us, inside the attic crawl space. I aimed my light upward. Dust drifted from the boards. Tessa shook her head, mouthing, "Don't." But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I grabbed the ladder and climbed. The hatch creaked open with a sound like splitting ice. My light swept across insulation, old boxes, a coiled rope, and at the far end, a red scarf stretched across the beams like a spider's web. The fabric pulsed once as if breathing. Below me, Mark shouted, "Ethan, get down!" The scarf twitched, uncoiling from the beam. I dropped from the ladder just as something heavy hit the boards above. The scarf slid through the hatch and fell beside me. Tessa screamed. I kicked it away. It left a smear of frost across the floorboards before vanishing into the dark like smoke. The radio on the table sprang to life again. No static this time, only my voice, calm and clear. "Don't run." The words made my stomach turn. That wasn't a recording. I had never said them. Mark lunged for the power cord, yanking it free. "Music," he ordered. I hit play on my phone. The room filled with an off-key rendition of Johnny Cash. The sound cracked through the cold air like sunlight breaking ice. The knocking stopped instantly. For several minutes, none of us spoke. The music played on, tinny and distorted but real, human. When the song ended, Mark exhaled. "It's done for now." Tessa rubbed her arms. "You said sunrise. It's only midnight." He looked at the window. "Then we keep the music going till it comes." We took turns playing songs, rock, folk, anything with rhythm. The sound seemed to hold the darkness at bay. Around 3, exhaustion caught up with us. Tessa dozed off against the wall, her head resting on her knees. I sat across from Mark. In the low light, his face looked carved from stone. "How long have you known about this?" I asked. "Too long." "You lost people here." He nodded once. "My partner, Brooks. He broke the second rule," answered the voice. "Thought it was me calling for help." "What did he hear?" Mark stared into the dying fire. He heard forgiveness. The silence after that felt heavier than before. At 4:12 a.m., a faint crack sounded from outside, like ice splitting underfoot. I went to the window. Through the mist, a figure moved along the tree line. It was Tessa. Or it looked like her. Same jacket, same braid, same quick stride. She turned toward the station, raising a hand. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Behind me, the real Tessa stirred and whispered, half asleep, "Is someone out there?" I didn't answer. Mark joined me at the window, eyes narrowing. "Rule 5, he said. "If you see yourself or anyone you know, don't let them in." Outside, the other Tessa smiled and beckoned. Her eyes caught the light just long enough for me to see that they reflected nothing at all. Mark pulled the curtains shut. The minutes crawled until dawn. When the first light bled over the mountains, the fog began to thin. We dared to open the door then. The air smelled sharp and clean, untouched, no footprints in the snow. But hanging from the porch rail was something small, a strip of red fabric tied in a knot. Beneath it, scratched into the wood with something sharp, were 4 words. "You stayed this time." I stared at it until my vision blurred. Mark touched my shoulder. "The valley's not finished with us," he said. And for the first time, I believed him. Sunrise in Alaska isn't instant. It creeps in reluctantly, like the world isn't sure it wants to wake up. When it finally did, the station felt different, lighter but fragile, like glass after an impact. We spent the early hours cleaning the mess from the night before. Mark burned the remaining scraps of the red fabric in a tin bucket outside, the smoke rising straight into the pale sky. "Fire erases its memory," he said quietly. Tessa and I didn't ask what he meant. By mid-morning, the fog had cleared entirely. The valley below looked almost peaceful, a ribbon of white and silver stretching toward the horizon. For a moment it was hard to believe anything unnatural had ever crawled out of it. Then the sensors started pinging again. Tessa was the first to notice. Movement, same coordinates as yesterday. Mark rubbed his temples. It never waits long. We geared up once more, though none of us wanted to. The trip back down the ridge felt like walking toward a grave we hadn't dug yet. The wind was steady, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. No fog this time, no voices, just the quiet crunch of snow under our boots. When we reached the valley mouth, we saw what had triggered the sensor. Tracks, human tracks, crossing from the far side, deep, deliberate, leading straight into the whispering valley. Mark crouched beside them, tracing the edge of one print with his glove. Too clean, too perfect. "They look recent," Tessa said. "They always do," Mark replied. I followed the tracks with my eyes, counting at least a dozen steps before they disappeared into the slope. The valley itself seemed still, but the air above it shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from the snow. "We need to know what's down there," Tessa said. "If we can record the source, maybe—" Mark cut her off. "No recordings. That's how it learns new voices." "Then what?" I asked. He hesitated. "We find the center, the spot where the sound begins. Then we get out." The descent felt longer this time, each step echoing like it didn't belong to us. I tried to stay focused on the terrain. Frost fractures, wind direction, the practical details that kept fear at bay. But every few minutes I caught the sense of someone walking just behind me. When I turned, nothing. At the valley floor, the air grew unnaturally still. The whispering had stopped entirely. The silence was worse. Tessa unpacked a thermal scanner and swept it across the ice. "There," she said, pointing. "Something's under the surface, warmer than everything else." We knelt. Through the translucent ice, I saw shapes, faint outlines of figures lying side by side, dozens of them. Bodies. Some wore ranger uniforms. Tessa's voice trembled. "Are those—" "Don't finish that sentence," Mark said. He took out a small vial of salt from his pocket and poured a thin line across the ice. "Boundary," he muttered. Then something unexpected happened. The whispering returned, but not from the valley. It came from our radios, all of them, even though they were off. 3 words repeated over and over, low and distorted. "Follow the sound." Tessa grabbed my arm. "Ethan, it's coming from the ridge, up there." She was right. A faint hum, almost mechanical, echoed from the slope above us. For the first time, Mark looked uncertain. We climbed toward the source. The humming grew louder, pulsing in waves. At the top of the incline stood an old relay tower, half collapsed, its solar panels shattered and rusted. "That's impossible," Mark said. "This thing's been dead for 20 years." But the lights on its console blinked faintly. Tessa knelt and brushed off the snow. "It's transmitting." "To what?" I asked. She connected her recorder to the tower's output jack. The screen filled with lines of unreadable code. Then it stabilized, and the speakers began to play sound, first static, then wind, then voices, dozens of them layered and overlapping, each one calling a name. Some I recognized, mine, Mark's, Tessa's, others that didn't belong to anyone alive. The noise swelled until it was unbearable. Mark ripped the cable free, but the tower kept humming. The snow around the base began to melt, revealing metal plates engraved with numbers, coordinates. The first set matched our location. The second pointed deeper north, far beyond any mapped trail. "What is this?" I shouted over the rising sound. Tessa stared at the screen. "A signal repeater. It's broadcasting the valley's echoes, but it's not receiving, it's sending." "Sending to who?" Before she could answer, the hum cut off. Total silence. Then faintly the same 3 words again, not through any device, but whispered by the wind itself. "Follow the sound." The ground trembled under our feet. A thin crack split the snow between us and the tower. From deep below came a groan, low, ancient, like something shifting in its sleep. Mark yelled, "Run!" We scrambled down the slope as the earth shook harder. Snow cascaded around us. Behind, the relay tower toppled with a metallic scream, swallowed by the opening ground. We didn't stop until we reached the ridge. The shaking faded, leaving the valley quiet again. Too quiet. When we looked back, the tower was gone. Mark bent over, catching his breath. "It's waking up again," he said. "What is?" Tessa demanded. "The thing the rules were written for." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, yellowed sheet of paper. The handwriting was neat, old, precise. "This was the first list," he said. "The one written before my time. The ranger who made it never came back. His last line says, 'If the voices start calling your name twice, run north and don't look back.'" Tessa frowned. "North? That's where the second coordinate points." I felt the paper tremble in the wind, the edges cold against my fingers. "So we follow it." Mark shook his head. "No, we survive it." That night, back at the station, the wind was calm again. For the first time in weeks, the world felt still. Then, as I sat writing this very report, my radio crackled once more. A single voice, barely a whisper. "Ethan, north." I stared at the speaker, waiting for the static to fade. It didn't. Instead, the voice repeated. This time, not as a call, but as a warning. "Ethan, north before it does." And that's where I stopped writing, because whatever waits beyond the ridge, the thing that teaches the forest to whisper, had just learned my name a third time. If you want to know what we found when we followed that voice north, make sure you subscribe. That's where the next rule began. There's a stretch of wilderness north of Denali that even maps hesitate to describe. No trails, no rescue routes, no ranger posts. Just a blank space labeled restricted terrain. That's where the coordinates pointed. We left before dawn, the sky a sheet of dull silver. Mark didn't speak during the ride, and Tessa barely looked up from the GPS unit in her lap. I tried to tell myself this was just another patrol, cold, hard, physical, but deep down I knew better. Every mile north felt like driving deeper into something that had been waiting for us. By noon, the trail vanished under fresh snow. We parked the ATVs at the base of a ridge and continued on foot. The air smelled like iron. "You sure about this?" Tessa asked quietly. "No," I said, "but it's what the map says." Mark grunted. "Maps don't matter here. The land changes when it wants to." That should have been superstition, but after everything we'd seen, it sounded like fact. We followed a half-frozen stream until we reached a narrow valley, its walls slick with frost. Animal tracks crisscrossed the banks. Wolf, moose, maybe bear, but all of them ended abruptly like something had erased the rest. At the far end of the valley stood a wooden sign, barely visible beneath years of rot. Most of the letters were gone, but one word remained carved deep into the surface. Michaels. Tessa frowned. "That was the name in your report, the ranger who wrote the first rules." Mark nodded grimly. "And this is where they found his notebook." The trail beyond the sign was a narrow path cutting between black spruces. The ground was littered with shards of glassy ice that cracked underfoot, echoing like distant footsteps. Every so often we'd find something, a torn strap, a broken compass, a half-buried metal tag, all etched with old ranger insignias. Then, an hour in, Tessa stopped. "Ethan, look!" Ahead of us, nailed to a tree, hung a ranger's badge. Beneath it, pinned by a rusted knife, was a photograph. 3 men standing beside a cabin, smiling at the camera. Mark's voice dropped. "That's Brooks, Michaels, and me." I stared at him. "This was you. 15 years ago," he said quietly, "before we knew what the valley really was." "What happened?" He didn't answer, just turned and kept walking. The deeper we went, the more wrong the forest felt. No animal sounds, no wind, just our breathing, and underneath it, the faint hum of something electrical, like power lines buried in the soil. Around the next bend, we found the cabin from the photograph, half collapsed, snow piled high on the roof, door hanging open. We entered slowly, flashlights cutting through the gloom. Dust danced in the beams. The walls were covered with maps and scribbled notes. Words carved into the wood read, Don't let it see your face. On the table sat a single notebook wrapped in wax paper. Tessa unsealed it with careful fingers. Inside were pages of tight handwriting, field notes from Ranger Michaels. The first entries were standard patrol logs, but halfway through the language changed. We found the first body today. No head, no blood, just silence. The rules work, but only when we remember them. It learns names. Tessa flipped to the final page. One sentence filled the center in heavy black ink. If you see the trail of heads, follow it home. She looked up at me. Trail of heads, what does that even mean? Before I could answer, Mark's flashlight beam froze on something near the back wall, an object half buried under debris. He knelt and pulled it free. A skull, human, clean, no jaw. The back of my neck prickled. There were more lined up along the cabin's rear wall, like trophies, each one facing the door. Jesus, Tessa whispered. Mark set the skull down gently. They're not trophies, they're markers. Markers for what? He didn't have time to answer. The ground trembled. A low vibration rolled through the cabin, rattling the glass. Earthquake? I asked. Tessa shook her head. Too rhythmic. From outside came a sound like footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Mark motioned for silence. Through a crack in the cabin wall, I saw it. A figure moving through the trees, tall as the door frame, wrapped in torn ranger gear. Its head was missing, but it moved like it could see perfectly well. It paused by the sign outside, sniffed the air, and turned toward the cabin. Tessa's hand found mine, shaking. Mark whispered, Don't move. Don't breathe. The thing stepped closer. Its boots made no sound on the snow. When it stopped at the threshold, I could see where the neck should have been, a clean cut, smooth as glass. Steam rose from it like breath. It lifted one hand and placed something on the doorstep. Then it left. We waited until the sound faded. Mark eased the door open. A folded piece of paper sat in the snow. I picked it up, written in the same tidy handwriting as the old rules. Welcome back, Mark. He stared at it for a long time, face pale. It remembers, he said. Tessa looked at him. Remembers what? Who it's missing. That night we made camp inside the cabin. None of us could sleep. The silence outside felt alive, pressing against the windows. Around midnight I took first watch. The stars above the ridge were sharp and cold. Then I saw movement near the trees again, a faint glow, blue-white like a lantern. I raised my binoculars. The light wasn't a lantern, it was a line. Tiny orbs stretching into the distance, leading deeper into the forest. A trail. The Headless Trail. I should have woken the others, but something in me wanted to see where it led. So I followed it. Each step made the lights ahead shift, drawing me on like will-o'-the-wisps. The forest opened into a clearing, and there they were, dozens of figures standing in the snow, all headless, all facing me. At their feet, half buried in frost, lay a ranger hat, mine. Before I could move, the air behind me whispered, Rule 2, Ethan. It was Mark's voice. I turned. No one was there. When I looked back, the clearing was empty, the lights gone. Only my footprints remained, and in each print, pressed deep into the snow, was a single word written in blood-red letters, Stay. I don't remember walking back to the cabin. One moment the clearing was full of silent figures. The next, I was stumbling through the door, snow still clinging to my jacket. Tessa sat up instantly. Where were you? You were gone for over an hour. I couldn't answer. I just dropped into the chair by the dying fire, shaking uncontrollably. Mark stood at the window, watching the tree line. You followed it, didn't you? I nodded. He sighed, the sound heavy and hollow. Then it knows you now. Tessa glanced between us. Knows him. What are you talking about? Mark didn't respond. He walked over to the table and grabbed the notebook we'd found earlier, the one written by Ranger Michaels. He flipped it open and pointed to a fresh page near the back. It wasn't blank anymore. 5 new lines had appeared, written in the same neat handwriting, but still glistening with wet ink. Rule 8. Never leave the circle of firelight. Rule 9. Don't write what you see. Rule 10. If you hear the rules changing, it's already too late. Tessa's voice dropped to a whisper. You think it wrote that? Mark stared at the page. No, I think the forest did. I tried to process what that meant. My head throbbed, like the cold had seeped into my skull. I reached for my canteen, but when I unscrewed the cap, the water inside was frozen solid, even though the air around us was warm. Tessa set up her recorder again. We need to document this. Every anomaly, every new rule. Something's trying to communicate. Mark snapped, No recordings. She flinched. Why? Because it listens back, he said. Every time you record, it hears you. That's how it learns your voice. I looked at the notebook again. The ink on the new rules had started to fade, smearing into the paper until the words looked like veins. Mark, I said slowly, what happened to Michaels? Did you ever find him? He hesitated. We found what was left of him. No head, like the others. But his notebook was open beside him, and the last page was blank. Until tonight. Tessa frowned. You think Ethan triggered it? Maybe, Mark said. Or maybe the forest decided it needed new rules. Outside, something howled. Not an animal, not human. A deep, metallic groan that vibrated through the floorboards. Tessa grabbed her flashlight. That came from the direction of the clearing. Mark blocked the door. We're not going back out there. But if it's moving, he slammed his fist against the wall. You think you can outsmart it. You can't study this. You survive it if it lets you. The cabin trembled. Dust fell from the rafters. The howl came again, closer this time, followed by a low rhythmic thumping, like footsteps the size of trees. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over the music app. Do we use it? Mark nodded. Now? I hit play, the cabin filled with distorted guitar chords, the familiar sound grounding us in reality. The thumping stopped mid-beat. The air shifted, then from the fireplace, a hiss. The flames bent sideways as if blown by invisible breath. Smoke twisted upward, forming shapes, outlines of faces that dissolved before fully forming. Tessa whispered, It's watching. Mark stepped forward, tossing more wood onto the fire. Then keep it watching this. The flames flared bright, forcing the shadow back. For a while, it worked. The air steadied. The cabin stopped shaking. But then the music on my phone glitched, the pitch dropping lower and lower until the singer's voice sounded inhuman. The lyrics distorted into words that weren't part of any song. Stay, stay, stay. I yanked the phone's battery out. The music stopped. So did the sound outside. Tessa exhaled shakily. That was using your playlist, wasn't it? I nodded. It's in the signal now. Mark rubbed his temples. We need to leave before nightfall. If it's rewriting the rules, that means it's changing the game. Where do we go? Tessa asked. He pointed toward the northern ridge, the direction of the second coordinate we'd found. That's where this started. Maybe it's where it ends. We packed fast, food, rope, spare batteries, and the cursed notebook wrapped in cloth. As we stepped outside, I felt something crunch under my boot. Another piece of red thread. It was stretched across the snow like a boundary line, leading toward the ridge. Tessa crouched and picked it up. "It's guiding us." "Or baiting us," Mark muttered. We followed it anyway. The trail wound through frozen pines, sunlight fading fast behind the peaks. After an hour, we reached a clearing ringed with stones. At the center stood a wooden post carved with names, dozens of them, each followed by a date. The most recent read, E. Cole, pending. My chest tightened. "What the hell is this?" Tessa brushed snow off another name. "Brooks, Michaels, these are all missing rangers." Mark knelt beside the post, jaw trembling. "It's a grave, a living one." I looked down. The snow beneath our feet wasn't snow at all. It was ash, pale and soft. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper through the trees. Not angry, not menacing, almost gentle. "Write the next rule." I turned toward the sound. "What?" The whisper came again, this time inside my head. "Write the next rule, Ethan." My hand moved before I realized it. Reaching for the notebook, I knelt and flipped to the last page. The ink began to spread across it, forming words as if guided by an invisible pen. Rule 11. When the forest asks, answer truthfully. Tessa shouted, "Ethan, stop!" But I couldn't. My fingers kept tracing letters I didn't understand. The air grew heavy. The ground beneath us vibrated again. Mark ripped the notebook from my hands and slammed it shut. "Run!" We sprinted toward the ridge, snow exploding around us. Behind, the clearing filled with whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping, repeating my name. "Ethan! Ethan! Ethan!" We didn't stop until we reached the crest. When I looked back, the clearing was empty again. No post, no names, no footprints, just untouched snow. Tessa fell to her knees, gasping. Did that really happen? Mark opened the notebook. The last page was blank again. But as we stood there, trying to catch our breath, words began to appear slowly, one at a time. "You lied." We stood on that ridge until our legs went numb, staring at the single phrase bleeding into the paper. "You lied." Mark tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped the notebook shut. "No more writing, no more rules. It's using you." But the words kept echoing inside my head long after he stuffed the book into his pack. "You lied." I wanted to scream that I didn't even know what lie it meant. The hike back to camp felt longer than before, though the path was the same. The forest had changed again. I could feel it. The air pressed closer, the silence denser. It wasn't watching anymore. It was waiting. When we reached the cabin, Tessa lit the lanterns and sank onto the cot. "What if it's not angry?" she said. "What if it's testing us?" Mark was checking his rifle. "That thing doesn't need to test anyone. It already knows how we die." She looked at me. "You saw something out there, didn't you, when you wrote that line?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe faces, dozens of them layered together. They weren't threatening, just watching." Mark slammed the bolt on the rifle. "Don't describe them." "Why not?" Tessa asked. He met her eyes. "Because describing it gives it form. That's how it spreads." His voice cracked slightly, the first time I'd heard fear in it. We fell silent. The wind outside was rising again, scratching against the walls like fingernails. I tried to focus on the sound of the fire instead, the normal things. But after a few minutes, another sound slipped through. Faint, rhythmic tapping from beneath the floorboards. Tessa froze. "Tell me that's the heater." Mark's jaw clenched. "There's no heater under the cabin." The tapping came again, faster now, I grabbed the flashlight and crouched, sweeping the beam across the floor. One of the planks near the center was slightly raised. Tessa knelt beside me. "Should we?" Mark's voice was firm. "No, we leave it." But I was already prying it loose. Curiosity had become instinct, dangerous, unstoppable. The plank came up with a groan. Beneath it lay a small metal box, wrapped in oilcloth. Mark swore under his breath. "That's Brooks's gear." He took it from me carefully, unwrapped it, and opened the latch. Inside were a compass, a radio battery, and a weathered cassette tape labeled in faded marker, Day 9. Tessa turned the tape over in her hands. "There's a player in the supply crate." Mark hesitated, then nodded. Short playback. 2 minutes, no more. The cassette clicked into the player. The tape hissed, then a voice came through, faint, male, exhausted. "Day 9. Michael says we can't leave. The voices know our coordinates. Every time we move, they shift closer. He thinks the forest is mapping us, using sound. If anyone finds this, don't..." The audio distorted, a burst of static swallowing the rest. Then, faintly, another voice joined, layered beneath Brooks's, repeating the same words in perfect sync. Tessa's eyes widened. "It's copying him." The two voices diverged, Brooks continuing his log, the echo mocking him a second later, rearranging his sentences. Then both fell silent. After a pause, something new whispered through the speaker. "You lied." Mark yanked the tape free and crushed it in his fist. "Enough. It's not communication. It's contamination." He tossed the fragments into the fire. The flames flared blue, then hissed out completely. Darkness flooded the cabin. For a few seconds, none of us moved. Then the radio, the one we hadn't touched, crackled to life. "Mark," a voice said. He froze. "Brooks?" "Mark, it's cold out here," the voice continued. "I followed the light, but it's gone." Tessa covered her mouth. "Oh, God," Mark whispered, "that's not him." The voice spoke again, closer now, as if it were standing outside the door. "You left me, Mark. You said you'd come back." I grabbed my phone and hit play on my emergency playlist. The familiar music broke the trance like sunlight through water. The radio cut off mid-sentence. Mark sank into the nearest chair, face pale. "That's what it does," he muttered. "It learns who you miss most." Tessa swallowed hard. "Then what does it want?" He looked at me. "Truth. That's why it said you lied. It doesn't feed on blood or fear. It feeds on confession." "Confession of what?" Mark didn't answer. He stared at the fire pit, his eyes distant. When dawn came, none of us had slept. The snow outside had stopped. The world unnaturally still again. Tessa sat by the window, clutching the ruined cassette shell. "What if we try to tell it the truth? If it wants honesty, maybe that's the key." Mark shook his head. "The moment you speak to it, it knows your voice. That's how it hunts. But we can't keep running forever." "We don't," I said quietly. "We listen." They both looked at me. "What if it's not the forest talking to us?" I continued. "But the people it's taken, trying to warn us before we become part of it too." Tessa's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Then what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. Outside, the snow began to move again, not falling but drifting sideways, forming thin trails that curved through the trees like living things. And from somewhere deep in the valley, a new sound rose, not whispering, not footsteps, but a faint melody. Shenandoah. The same song from before, only this time 3 voices sang in harmony, mine, Tessa's, and Mark's. Morning in the wilderness is supposed to mean safety. The light returns, the air feels clean again. and the human brain starts believing the night was just a trick of shadows. But when we stepped outside that day, the forest didn't look different at all. The stillness felt earned, as if something had allowed us to keep it for a few more hours. Mark stood by the old signpost from the previous day, staring north. "It's quieter than it should be," he said. Tessa adjusted her pack. "Maybe it's finished with us." He shook his head. "Nothing out here finishes. It pauses." We started north, following the shallow valley floor where sunlight had begun melting through the snow. The wind had softened into a steady hum, almost musical. Every once in a while I thought I heard a faint voice inside that sound, but not calling my name this time. It sounded more like remembering. After an hour of climbing, we reached a ridge where the view opened across miles of wilderness. For the first time since we'd begun, I could see the world beyond the valley. Peaks glowing orange in the early light, a frozen lake sparkling far below. "This place isn't evil," Tessa said quietly. "It's beautiful, terrible, but beautiful." Mark's reply was soft. "That's the problem with most things that can kill you." He handed me the notebook. "You're the only one it listens to now. Read what's left." I unwrapped the cloth and opened to the last written rule. "You lied." The rest of the page was empty, waiting. I looked up at him. "What do you want me to do?" "Tell it the truth." "What truth?" He stared at the horizon. "The one I never wrote down." His voice trembled slightly as he continued. 15 years ago, when Brooks disappeared, I wasn't where I said I was. He didn't break the rule. I did. He called for help, and I didn't answer. I told the service we lost radio contact, but I heard him until the end. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of a man's voice. Calm, tired, repeating the same sentence over and over. "You left me." Mark closed his eyes. "That's why it said you lied. It wasn't talking to you, Ethan. It was talking through you, to me." Tessa reached for his arm, but he shook his head. "If this thing needs truth, maybe that's what keeps it quiet. I owe it mine." He took the notebook, turned to a blank page, and began writing slowly. I couldn't see the words, but I could see his face relax as he finished. He tore the page out, folded it once, and laid it on a flat stone. The air around us went still, not heavy, not cold, just silent in a way that felt complete. The trees seemed to draw one long breath and let it go. When the wind returned, it carried only the sound of leaves moving, ordinary and harmless. Tessa looked at me, eyes wide. It stopped. Mark smiled faintly. "It's enough." He set the rest of the notebook on the stone and stepped back. "Let it have the lies. We'll keep the rules." We walked away, not speaking until the cabin came into view again. By the time we reached the door, the air smelled of wood smoke and thawing pine. The weight in my chest had finally eased. Inside, Tessa brewed coffee while I checked the equipment. Everything worked again. Radios, batteries, even the generator. It was as if the storm had never happened. Mark stood outside on the porch, staring toward the ridge. "You hear that?" he asked when I joined him. "Nothing?" "Exactly," he smiled. "Sometimes survival is that simple." For the first time since I'd met him, he looked at peace. We stayed another day to collect samples and repair the old trail markers. No whispers, no figures. Just wind and the sound of our boots on snow. Before we left, I walked back to the stone ridge where he'd placed the notebook. The paper he'd written on was gone. Only the faint outline of one sentence remained, burned into the surface of the rock. Rule 12. Forgive what you leave behind. I didn't tell Tessa about it until we were halfway back to the station. That night, when I filed the official report, I wrote only this: weather interference affected communication. No further incidents. But at the bottom of the page, in small handwriting only I would ever notice, I added one more line. Sometimes the forest keeps what it needs, so the rest of us can go home. The wilderness has a way of pretending nothing happened. You can live through the most harrowing night of your life, crawl out of a valley that shouldn't exist, and by morning, the forest looks exactly the same, untouched, indifferent, almost beautiful. We returned to Denali Station in silence. The snow had melted along the access road, revealing muddy ruts and patches of frozen moss. I drove while Tessa navigated, her gloved hands trembling every time the radio hissed with static. Mark sat in the back, staring out the window, his reflection pale against the frost. When we reached the station, the generator was humming again, lights steady. The world felt normal. Too normal. Tessa unloaded gear, and Mark walked straight past the office and out onto the frozen lake behind the compound. I followed him after a few minutes. He stood there, hands in his coat pockets, breathing slow and steady, eyes on the ridgeline to the north. "That ridge is watching us," he said finally. "It always has," I answered. He didn't look away. "You think it'll let us go?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But for now, it's quiet." That night, I dreamed of the notebook again, the pages blank except for one new line written across the bottom. "You haven't finished yet." For 3 days, nothing strange happened. The park seemed peaceful. Visitors returned. Tourists took photos with the Denali sign, and our station radio crackled with ordinary reports: moose sightings, equipment checks, weather warnings. Still, I couldn't stop looking north. Every evening I found myself drawn outside to the same frozen lake, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. On the 4th day, Tessa came into the office holding a stack of files. "Ethan, look at this," she said, spreading old incident reports across my desk. "These are from 15 years ago," I said, flipping through them. She pointed to the names on the first page: Ranger Samuel Brooks, Ranger Jonathan Michaels, Supervisor Mark Hayes. My chest tightened. "These are Mark's original patrol logs," she said, "the ones that supposedly got lost in the flood." But they weren't lost. Someone had hidden them in the back of the archives. The handwriting was Mark's, steady, clipped, professional. But the tone shifted halfway through. The early entries were routine: equipment inventories, wildlife tracking, visitor incidents. Then, abruptly, the writing turned personal. "Brooks says the forest is speaking again. Michaels thinks it's mimicking us. If we leave, it follows." The last entry was dated the day before Brooks disappeared. "We broke the circle. We lied to the forest. Now it knows our names." I looked up from the page. "He lied to us too." Tessa lowered her voice. "He said Brooks got lost in a storm, but this says otherwise." Before we could speak further, the station door opened. Mark stepped in, face unreadable. "You found them," he said quietly. I didn't ask how he knew. "You hid these reports," I said. "I protected you from them," he corrected. Tessa's voice trembled. "Protected us from what, exactly?" Mark walked to the window, staring out toward the tree line. "From understanding too much. From thinking the rules are just superstition." He turned back to us. "Every rule came from someone who broke it. Brooks ignored the circle. Michaels tried to reason with the forest. Both disappeared. When I survived, I thought maybe the forest forgave me. But it never does. He reached into his pocket and tossed a folded piece of paper onto the desk. It was another rule list, but this one had 6 new lines written in different handwriting, Tessa's, mine, and one that looked like neither. Rule 13, the forest remembers every lie. Rule 14, it will return what you owe. How? Tessa started. I didn't write that, I said. Mark nodded. That's what scares me. That night, a storm rolled in from the north. The wind howled against the station walls, rattling the windows. I sat by the radio, pretending to monitor emergency channels, but mostly just listening for voices that shouldn't be there. At 2:17 a.m., one came through. Ranger Cole, do you copy? The signal was faint, but unmistakable. This is Ranger Cole, I replied automatically. North Ridge Checkpoint, the voice said. We found your missing equipment, requesting pickup. I froze. There hadn't been a checkpoint on North Ridge for over a decade. I switched frequencies. Identify yourself. Static. Then again, North Ridge Checkpoint, requesting pickup. Tessa appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled, eyes wide. You heard it too? Yeah, I said, and that's impossible. Mark joined us, already dressed for the cold. It's not a call, he said. It's an invitation. We left before dawn. The snow was heavy but manageable, visibility poor. The northern peaks were half buried in mist, their edges dissolving into the clouds. We followed the old access trail, using the GPS to track the coordinates from the radio's signal. After 2 hours, the wind began to die, replaced by eerie stillness. The snowpack ahead of us flattened into an open expanse, a plateau surrounded by skeletal pines. This was the old checkpoint site, Mark said, voice barely audible, before the avalanche. We dismounted and began searching. After a few minutes, Tessa called out, Ethan, over here! I hurried to where she was standing. In the snow before her lay something half buried, a metal box, like a field transmitter, its antenna broken. Beside it, footprints circled the device. Except they weren't ours. They were older, frozen deep into the ice, preserved by time. And there were only 2 sets, one leading in, none leading out. Mark crouched beside the transmitter. This is Brooks's unit, he said. How can you tell? He flipped the identification plate toward us. The serial number matched the old reports. Tessa touched the surface gently. Then who turned it on? Before anyone could answer, the transmitter clicked. The indicator light blinked green. A voice whispered through the static. Truth is the last rule. The words froze us in place. Did it just... Tessa started. Yeah, I said. It spoke. The wind began to rise again, swirling snow around our legs. The voice continued, broken by bursts of static. Truth, the last rule. Mark stepped closer to the transmitter. What truth? Silence. Then, you broke the circle. He went pale. It remembers. Tessa looked between us. Mark, what circle? He took a deep breath. We thought the rules were defenses, ways to protect ourselves, but they were boundaries, and we crossed them. The valley was never meant to be mapped. The transmitter clicked again. Return what you took. Tessa's voice was small. The notebook? Mark shook his head. No, it means me. He turned toward the ridge. I'm the debt. Before I could stop him, he started walking north. The snow swallowed his tracks almost instantly. Mark! Tessa shouted. He didn't turn back. Keep the rules alive, he called, and write the last one. Then the wind closed over his voice. We tried to follow, but the storm hit full force. The whiteouts swallowed everything. By the time we reached the ridge, there was no sign of him. No footprints, no sound, nothing but the endless hum of wind. We returned to the station alone. That night, I opened my notebook again. The last page was blank except for the faint imprint of Mark's handwriting beneath the paper fibers, like ghost text pressing from underneath. I traced the lines slowly until words began to emerge. Rule 15. When one is taken, another must remember. I closed the notebook and whispered, "I'll remember." Outside, the wind settled, carrying no voices this time, only quiet. Tessa sat by the window, looking toward the north. "Do you think he's gone?" "No," I said softly. "He's where the rules live now." It's been 6 months since the storm that took Mark Hayes. The service filed his disappearance as a terrain accident during routine patrol. I signed that report myself. I wrote the words. I sent them to headquarters, and I watched them turn an impossible event into a paragraph that fit government paperwork. But the truth never fit. It still doesn't. The northern sector of Denali is closed again now. Seasonal instability, the memo says. But everyone here knows the real reason. No one wants to patrol past the ridge anymore. No one asks why the radio signal goes dead at the same coordinates or why the snow melts faster there in spring. The mountain holds its silence like a secret. Some nights, when I sit alone in the ranger office, I think I hear a second radio clicking on in the background. It's always tuned to the same frequency, the old North Ridge checkpoint, long buried under ice. It never speaks, just breathes. 2 weeks ago, the Park Service sent me a request from the Anchorage office, an official audit of all Denali disappearance cases from the last 20 years. A polite way of asking me to relive everything we went through. Tessa offered to help. She's still here, still refusing to transfer, even after what happened to Mark. We spread the files across the map table. Dozens of missing person cases, hikers, climbers, rangers, most marked unresolved. Tessa pointed to a pattern. Every single case lines up along this line. Same latitude, 30-mile span, North Ridge Trail. The trail that no longer exists. I said, "You think it's still active?" She didn't answer right away. "I think it's listening." We read deeper into the older files. Handwritten reports by men I'd never met, their words brittle with age. In the margins of one 1983 report, a ranger named Alaskan had written something no one else noticed. The rules are different in spring. Beneath it, faint pencil marks formed a sentence almost erased by time. The forest wakes slower than we do. Tessa looked up at me. Maybe that's why it's quiet now. It's still waking up. Late May brings the anniversary of Mark's disappearance. Tradition says we hike out to the Memorial Ridge, leave a small metal tag engraved with the ranger's name, and say nothing. Words don't feel right out there. This year, Tessa insisted we go together. "He'd hate being a ghost story," she said. We hiked in silence. The snow line had receded, revealing black rock and patches of stubborn moss. The wind was gentle, carrying the clean scent of meltwater. At the ridge, we found the marker we'd left last year still standing. The engraving was simple. Mark Hayes. He kept the rules. Tessa knelt to brush snow from its base. "It's untouched," she said. I nodded. "That's good." Then she frowned. "Ethan, look." In the soft earth beside the stone, faint boot prints, fresh, not ours, led away toward the northern ridge. The pattern matched standard-issue ranger boots. We hadn't had any patrols up here in months. I followed the tracks a few yards before they vanished into loose gravel. The wind carried a low hum that might have been my imagination, or a voice just below hearing range. When I turned back, Tessa was watching me carefully. "Don't," she said. "Don't follow it again." I didn't. But I wanted to. 3 nights later, a truck pulled into the station after hours. The man who stepped out wore civilian clothes, but the way he moved screamed former ranger. Careful, quiet, shoulders always angled toward the exits. "Agent Norris," he said, flashing a badge from the Department of the Interior. "You're Ethan Cole?" "Yes, sir." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a black and white photograph, grainy, taken from a helicopter. A long shadow stretched across the snow north of Denali, vaguely human in shape. "This was captured last week during a geological survey," he said. "We thought it was a trick of light until the next 2 frames showed it moving." I looked closer. The figure was wearing a ranger parka. Norris lowered his voice. "Do you recognize the man?" Tessa stepped forward. "That can't be him." Norris's tone stayed calm. "We're not sure what it is, but your station's name came up in our archives. Something about rules. What does that mean?" I lied. "Old ranger jokes, safety guidelines." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "If you hear anything on your channels, you call us immediately. Understood?" When he left, Tessa whispered, "You think it's Mark?" I looked at the photo again. The figure's head was tilted upward toward the helicopter, as if aware of being watched. "I think," I said slowly, "the mountain keeps its promises." June arrived with long daylight and endless work. Trail inspections, rescues, paperwork. On the surface, life went back to normal, but the feeling of being observed never faded. One afternoon, I found a package on my desk, wrapped in weatherproof canvas. No return address. Inside, a single field notebook. The cover was water-stained but intact. The first page read, "For the next ranger who listens." I turned to the final entry. It was Mark's handwriting. "The rules are not commands. They're agreements. You obey them. The forest obeys you. Break them, and the forest remembers." At the bottom of the page, a final line, added later in smaller script. "The forest remembers differently each year." I sat there for a long time, staring at the words. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the eaves just enough to sound like someone knocking. Tessa came in. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just paperwork." But my hands were still shaking when I slid the notebook into the drawer. On July 12th, the radio came alive again. I was alone on night shift. The frequency was clear and sharp. No static, no distortion. Just a calm, steady voice. "Ranger Cole," it said, "reporting from North Ridge checkpoint. Visibility clear, trails stable." My stomach dropped. It was Mark's voice. "Mark?" I whispered. "Copy that," the voice continued. 3 rangers accounted for. Requesting update on Rule 6. I didn't answer. Couldn't. The voice repeated the message twice more, then faded out, leaving only wind. When I checked the signal log, there was nothing. No incoming transmission, no recorded audio, just an empty channel. Tessa found me staring at the radio half an hour later. "What happened?" I played the silence for her. She listened, then said softly, "Sometimes an echo isn't just a sound. It's a reminder." A few weeks later, I hiked to the northern ridge alone. I carried only a small pack, my notebook, and the memory of that voice. At the ridge, the air felt different, warmer, alive. The snow had melted into a wide pool of clear water. Beneath the surface, something glimmered metal. I reached in and pulled out a small ranger badge, its surface tarnished but legible. "Mark Hayes, On the back, scratched by hand, was a single word: listen. I turned the badge over again and watched sunlight flash across it like a mirror. For a moment, I could have sworn the reflection moved on its own, bending away from my hand toward the valley below. When I looked up, I saw faint movement on the far slope, a figure standing motionless against the horizon, just at the edge of the trees. No face, no features, just the posture of someone who knew the rules better than anyone alive. The wind carried a single sentence from somewhere far off. Rule 0, respect the silence. Then the figure turned and vanished into the tree line. I wrote my final report that night. It will be filed, archived, and probably forgotten like all the others before it. But this time I added something that won't fit on paper. There are places in Alaska where sound moves differently, where silence holds its own gravity. Denali is one of them. Maybe the rules aren't supernatural at all. Maybe they're physics we don't understand yet. Or maybe they're mercy. The forest doesn't hate us. It warns us. When people ask why I still work here, I tell them the same thing. Because every story in these mountains starts as a warning someone ignored. The park closes at dusk now. Tourists drive away, and I lock the gate alone. On clear nights, if you stand by the frozen lake and listen carefully, you can hear a radio humming faintly somewhere north of the ridge. No voice, just a hum. For now, that's the story I filed. Whether you believe it or not, that's your choice. But if you ever find yourself hiking north of Denali and your radio picks up a clear signal on Channel 6, don't answer it. Just keep walking and remember the last rule. When one is taken, another must remember, because the forest still remembers me. Years pass differently in the north. Seasons don't change here. They rotate slowly like an old compass needle, deciding which direction still matters. It's been 12 years since Ranger Ethan Cole vanished from Denali National Park. That's the official version anyway. Lost during off-season maintenance patrol. Presumed dead. There's a small bronze plaque for him now at the visitor center, between two vending machines. Tourists brush past it on their way to buy postcards and bottled water. Most never read the inscription. But if you do, if you stop long enough to trace the cold metal with your fingers, you'll see the last line isn't like the others. It doesn't list a date of death, it just says, he remembered. Every spring when the snow thaws around the base of that plaque, a circle of red moss grows there. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the park. The maintenance crews try to clear it every year, but it always comes back. Perfect circle, 4 feet wide. Some say it's a chemical reaction. Others whisper it's a marker, a boundary. The old rangers, the ones who knew Ethan, say it's where the forest listens. New recruits sometimes report strange things on the radio when they patrol near the North Ridge. Faint breathing, a voice reciting numbers that don't match any coordinates. The sound of wind moving inside the signal. When they return to base and play back the recordings, there's never anything there. The service calls it interference. Locals call it Cole's echo. Every once in a while, a hiker swears they've seen a man standing just beyond the tree line, tall, wearing ranger green, head slightly bowed as if listening to the ground. He never speaks. He never approaches. He just raises one hand in warning when the wind starts to shift, as though reminding anyone who can still hear. Respect the silence. And then he's gone. They built a new communications tower on the ridge last year. The engineers said the soil was unusually conductive, almost humming beneath their boots. On the first day of operation, the tower transmitted a test signal, on all channels at once. For exactly 13 seconds, every radio in Denali played the same sound: wind, footsteps, and a voice, steady, calm, human, saying, "The forest remembers differently each year." Then silence. No one ever explained the source. Now, when the sun sets behind the peaks and the park empties out, the wind comes down the slopes carrying a rhythm that sounds almost like breathing. If you listen closely, really listen, you might hear a faint whisper woven through it, as if the wilderness itself is telling the story again. Some rules protect you, some rules define you, and the last one keeps you here. Maybe Ethan Cole became what the forest needed: a keeper, a memory, a warning. Or maybe he's still out there, following the same invisible trail, writing the next rule for whoever dares to listen. Either way, Denali stays quiet when the sun goes down, and the silence, if you stand there long enough, feels almost alive. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe and keep your headphones close, because the forest doesn't just take people, it keeps their voices, and maybe, just maybe, the next story you hear won't be fiction.